You are listening to the Tricorder Transmissions Special Episode 20. And now, here are Craig and Jeff.
Welcome back to the Tricorder Transmissions. This is our 20th supplemental log episode. We have a very special episode for you today, and we are your hosts, Jeff Hewlett.
And Craig Cohen.
So we have with us an incredible guest today. We're very humbled to have him here with us. It's author and artist, one of the creators of the refit Starship Enterprise from Star Trek The Motion Picture, Mr. Paul Olsen.
Well, hello. As Mae West would say, well, hello.
That was a good impression.
I met her.
Did you?
Yeah, I met her. I've got to tell you this quickly because It was brilliant. I was seeing a girl who in LA who was an extra, and we were chatting, pillow talk one night, and she was saying, "Oh, Mae," and I said, "Mae, who's Mae?" And she said, "Oh, Mae West, we're good friends." And I said, "What?" Because I've always loved Mae West. I just thought, I mean, she was brilliant. And she's from your part of the world. And she wrote all her own stuff, and real classy woman. And she said, "Oh, you want to meet her? I'm working on a film with her, and with Timothy Dalton called Sextet." So the next day, during the lunch break, Mae's trailer was parked at MacArthur Park, actually, made famous in the song that Richard Harris sang. And her trailer was parked there, and Liberty said, "Here, I've arranged it with Mae." And she went up the stairs to the trailer and went in. I could hear them talking. And then she peeked around the corner and said, come on. So I walked up the steps and walked in, and there was Mae sat at her dressing table, and everything in the trailer was pink. And she had one of those classic dressing tables with all the little light bulbs around it,
Mm-hmm.
And Liberty said, "Mae, this is my friend Paul, and Paul, this is Mae." And Mae looked up, she held out her hand to be kissed, and she said, "Well, hello." Could have knocked it over with a feather.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So we were having a conversation before the show began about your travels and how you had moved from the U.S. over to London. You want to let our audience know how all that came about?
Well, right. I moved, I grew up in San Francisco, and then I moved to London in the 70s and did a lot of Robin Trower's album covers. And I was playing drums in various bands, and I was in a band with a bunch of Australians who were going back to Australia when the Arab oil embargo struck. And in 1974, I mean, all records were made with vinyl, and you couldn't get vinyl in Europe because vinyl needs oil, and there just was no vinyl available. And all the record companies that specialized in rock bands moved offices to LA. And so all my Australian friends were going back to Australia, but they were going to stop off in LA on the way. In the meantime, I met a girl at the Supertramp Moving to America party, and we decided to go back to San Francisco, where I was quite well known before I left for London, and we'd start an art studio together. And that all kind of came apart as we were traveling across America. And she took all my stuff in the car we had in the middle of the night in San Francisco and drove down to LA. So I got down to LA, and she was seeing a guy named Peter Lloyd, who was an English guy who was one of the top airbrush illustrators in the world. And the trailer covers I had done, I tried to make them look like they were airbrushed, but I did them in oil paints, and I didn't know anything about an airbrush, and I didn't know how to use one. And if you don't have somebody to show you, they're almost impossible to master. So anyway, I met Peter, and he and I got on great, and I needed some work, and he had plenty of work coming in, and he said, well, you can help me, you know. And then one of his best friends was a guy named Ed Scarisbrick, who was another English guy, an airbrush illustrator. And these guys were doing very well. I mean, they were making $250,000 a year back then, back in the mid 70s. And then one day, after I got going with my illustration and everything with their help, Ed called me up. He was sharing a studio with a guy named Charlie White, who was the guy in the world with an airbrush. He's the one who started the whole chrome lettering thing that took off in the mid 70s, late 70s. And every ad had to have chrome lettering in it once he cracked how to do it. And Ed shared a studio with Charlie, and Charlie got a phone call from a guy named Jim Dow, who he had grown up with and gone to school with. And Jim Dow ran Magicam, and Magicam had the contract to do all the models for Star Trek for the motion picture. And Jim called Charlie and hoping to get Charlie to paint the Enterprise and thinking it would only take about a month to do. And Charlie said, look, I've got a freelance business. I can't take a month off. And it took me 8 months to paint the thing. And it would have taken Charlie probably a bit less, but not much less, you know, and he wouldn't have had a freelance business at the end of it. So Charlie said to Jim, well, I can't. And Jim was at his wit's end, and because they had built this beautiful model and they needed somebody really good to, you know, finish it off. And so Charlie said, hang on for a minute. And he said to Ed, he said, don't you have a friend of yours who's looking for work, you know, who can use an airbrush? And by then, Peter had taught me all the ins and outs and trickery using an airbrush. And, you know, I got pretty quick at it. And Ed said, yeah. And so Ed got Jim's number, and I'm up at my studio, and I had a house in the hills and overlooking all of LA at the time. And the phone rings, and I said, hello, and Paul, it's Ed. How would you like to paint the Starship Enterprise? That was it. And so of course I turned him down. And so I got Jim's details and hopped on my motorcycle and zipped down into Hollywood, which was only a 10-minute ride away, and brought my stuff in to show Jim. And Jim looked at my stuff and he said, yeah, I think you'll do. And he led me down a hallway into a huge big room, and there are all the model makers in there, and introduced me to everybody. And then we came back down the hallway towards the front of the building and into a spray booth, and there she was.
Wow.
And it was, I mean, I wasn't a Trekkie, but obviously, you know, I knew what the Enterprise was, and to actually step into the room with that stunning model just there, and basically Jim gave me the keys, you know, and said, get on with it.
That's pretty incredible. It's pretty kind of surreal listening to you talking about this experience, because I can remember as a young kid, about 5 or 6 years old, sitting in a movie theater with my uncle and some other family members watching this movie and being in awe of the ships. And to hear you talk about actually working on it, it's pretty amazing.
It was a wonderful experience, but I'll tell you what, it was daunting, because Jim said, look, he had restored a 1935 Ford and found some pearlescent paints, and he sort of did some pearl paint on it. And he said, I think it'd be kind of nifty if you use pearl paints. And he said, here's where you can go to get them. And I thought it was a great idea as well, because they're transparent. And basically the ship was all white, but it needed breaking up into human-sized areas. You had to have detail and panel breakup to give the thing scale, because you have to make an 8-foot model look like it's 1,000 feet long, you know. And the pearl paints were perfect because they were transparent, and they added a bit of tone to the model, but only a tiny bit, but lots of color. And as the ship passed through the lighting, and the camera lens moved across the surface of the ship, the colors would pearlesce and flip flop and go to their complements, and I mean, the thing just looks stunning.
Now, how much work did you have to do with the camera crew to ensure that it was going to look the way it needed to, or did you just do your work and then get feedback from them?
Yeah, what happened? The way we did it is, I worked on the Enterprise, and I had some model makers working with me because they were still tidying up various bits and pieces to get various surfaces ready for paint. And the surfaces had to be absolutely perfect. I mean, I couldn't believe the meticulousness of these model makers with little dental tools and just getting everything bang on, because on some of the shots, the lens would only be inches away from the surface, so it had to be absolutely bang on perfect. So the whole time I painted it until the last 2 months, there were always model makers working a bit ahead of me of the various bits I was doing. And we always worked in brightly lit studios with lots of fluorescent lighting. And when I finished and they wheeled the model out onto the shooting stage, which was all black everything, black floor, velvet curtains, everything was black. They locked everyone out, even the director, for 3 days while they lit it. And then we were brought in with all the lights out and holding hands and into this dark area. And then they hit the lights and lit that baby up. And I couldn't believe it, because it was lit with dramatic lighting, which, none of us had ever seen it lit dramatically. And it was in the dry dock, it was breathtaking, absolutely breathtaking. But no, then after that, my bit was done, and then Doug asked me, they were in a jam. We were really up against a timeline to get all the effects done, and he said, look, can you help out with the special effects? And so then I spent the last 3 months designing and rendering a lot of the V'ger effects, the initial ones flying into V'ger.
Now, depending on the stories that you hear and believe, is it true that the effects for that movie were really never 100% done?
Well, I left the movie 6 weeks before they tied it up to come over to come to England to get married. I mean, the marriage didn't last, but I came over anyway. I left at the end of September, and boy, they worked up until I think the first week in December. So I don't know, but I know I saw the finished film, and I don't know anything about the editing of it and what they had to drop or what they had to leave out. Although there was this lovely guy named Don Davis he specialized in airbrushing galaxies, and he'd done a lot of science fiction stuff and a lot of TV shows, and before Hubble and all that. And he did just some stunning stuff. And he was brought on and paid a ton of money to paint, to airbrush various nebula and galaxies that were going to go behind the opening titles. And they didn't have time to shoot, or the money, I think, to shoot them all. And I know just before I left that he was given word that all his beautiful artwork wasn't going to be used. Oh. And I'd have given anything. I mean, I would nip in just to watch him work. He did beautiful, beautiful work on these big. There's this black shiny paper called Exeter paper, which is a glossy black paper, and it was 3 feet tall. They were big rolls of paper, and they cost thousands of dollars each. And then he worked at CinemaScope aspect ratio, 2:35:1. So they were 3 feet tall and about 8 feet long. Each one of these beautiful paintings he did, and they were just drop dead gorgeous. And when he was told that they weren't going to use his work, he got paid, and he got paid handsomely. He locked his door, and we were in a series of studio offices, and we heard all this banging and rattling of paper and everything, and he ripped up and ruined all his work.
Oh, wow.
He was so upset. And we couldn't get in, and the door was locked, and we were banging on it and everything. And and then he left. And so that was really upsetting. So I know, that certainly didn't get on the screen.
Oh, that's pretty heartbreaking. Now, you've written a book about all these experiences, correct?
Yeah. It's called Creating the Enterprise.
It's very cool. So all of the stuff that you talked about today, plus a lot of other stuff, I guess, is what's in that book.
Yeah.
And that ties in with your 1701 rebuild project, which was what we're really here to talk about. Which, do you want to explain the project a little bit for people who may not be aware of it yet?
Sure. As a result of writing the book, and basically it's difficult, I think, for fans to imagine, but all of us who worked on the movie, then when that movie was done, everyone thought, Paramount included, that okay, we've done the movie, that's it, gone. And the Enterprise was boxed up, and it was going to be sent to the Smithsonian to be hung in the Air and Space Museum, actually. But so after that, then, I started working on other movies, and everybody kind of went their own way. And then people's lives developed and changed and everything. And I didn't forget about, my work on the Enterprise, because it was a highlight. But, 34 years have gone by. And this a guy I met over here who's a real Trekkie called me up just over 2 years ago and said, Paul, there's a big Star Trek convention at the Excel in London. You want to see if I can get you to speak? And I said, sure, yeah, that'd be fun. And I was blown away. There were 30,000 people there. And the tickets were, the VIP tickets were $5,000 each.
Wow.
For 3 days, right? And first class, and you went to all the parties and met all the stars. And, William Shatner was there, and tons and tons of stars from the various TV shows and films, and Patrick Stewart and everybody. So I was so blown away by my experience speaking at this thing and all the people I met. And when the weekend was over, I woke up on the Monday morning and I thought, I better write about my part in this, because there are so many people. If the people, thousands of people I met, are any indication of the interest all over the world, I owe it to them as much as myself to get it all down. So I wrote the book, and then as a result of writing the book, I thought that I'd like to get back together and interview Richard Taylor, who designed the Enterprise, and Jim Dow, who built it. So I got hold of them, and they said, yeah, let's get together. And so we did. I flew over to LA, and I interviewed them and videoed it. And then I went back this year, well, not this year, in 2014 in April, and a guy named Boyd Crompton, who you probably know, in Texas at TrekWorks, flew out to interview us. And, we had discussed what had happened to the Enterprise, and we found out that, Paramount auctioned it off at Christie's in 2006 to a private buyer. I won't mention who it is, because, he wants his own privacy. But the Enterprise is gone, and Star Trek has no heartbeat. The Enterprise is the heart and soul of the franchise. And
yeah.
And Boyd said, look, why don't you guys rebuild it? Do it again.
Wow.
And so we looked at each other, and Jim said, hey, with all modern techniques and everything, and he loves all that stuff, working with his hands, and with all the modern tools for model making and molding and everything. And he said, right. He said, let's do it. Paul, get it done. So it was up to me, basically. And so I put together the website to raise working capital to get the project off the ground. And that's 1701rebuild.com, to get fans to contribute. And for their contributions, they get value for money. They get some really nice one-of-a-kind premiums that are very, very collectible. And then I can get the working capital to hire a PR firm, get over to LA, and get in the world's media to alert fans as to what we're doing. And, there are millions and millions and millions of Star Trek fans out there. And it's going to take several $1 million to recreate the model, and it'll take 14 to 16 months to rebuild it. But, if we were able to get $1 from 3 million fans, we'd be there.
Yeah. And the great thing about this project, unless I'm mistaken, is as soon as somebody donates, your levels go from $15 all the way up to $500. But as soon as they donate, let's say at that $15 level, they're going to receive that same day or within a few days a PDF copy of your book, Creating the Enterprise.
Yeah, within 12 to 15 hours, depending on their time zone and, when I'm sleeping. Because as soon as the orders come in, I send out the PDF ebook at the $15 level. But at any level, and there's some cracker, at $300, you can get $20,000 or $30,000 worth of stuff. But at any level, to really put the topping on the cake, everyone who becomes what I call a prime mover to help me get this thing off the ground will have their name engraved on a piece of sculpture that Richard Taylor and myself will design that will accompany the Enterprise wherever she is in the world. And everyone who becomes a prime mover will have their name inscribed on this piece of sculpture that will be on a rotating dais, and that will complement the Enterprise. And Richard is going to design a huge, fabulous environment for the Enterprise to be shown off in. And, we will always keep her available to the public, say at casinos around the world, hotel lobbies, conventions, except if she's being used in a movie. Obviously, then she's out of sight for while they're shooting her. But other than that, we want to keep her available to the fans so that people can enjoy seeing her.
That's excellent. And you can find out all the information about this project and how to donate and the reward levels at 1701rebuild.com, and we will include that in the show notes.
Oh, thank you.
There's also a couple of other websites I noticed that you have out there. If people want to learn a little bit more about you, Paul, where can they find you on the internet?
Oh, that's olsenart.com, OLSENART.com.
Oh, very cool. So we will include that as well in our show notes.
Thank you. Well, I hope that everyone who listens will have a look at the 1701rebuild.com website. And because once I reach my goal, it's $24,000, and I think we've got $3,200 or $3,300 at the moment. But once I reach that goal, then that stops, and whoever becomes prime movers up to that point, then that's the end of it, of being a prime mover. And then however many names we have, those will be the people that will appear with the Enterprise with their name forever. For the next several centuries at least.
All right. So yeah, it is in your best interest to donate early and not wait and, sweat how much money the project's making. If it's something you believe in, get the book PDF now, enjoy that, and then also help this project get going. It sounds like a really, really exciting project, and I can't wait to contribute myself and then also eventually see the finished product.
Yeah, well, thank you. And also, once I get the operating capital, then within a couple of months, we'll start the big fundraiser and to get cracking on rebuilding the Enterprise. And I'm hoping that, we can get started sometime during the summer.
Wow, that's great. That's awesome. And before we sign off, I know you said that early on when you first started working on the film, you weren't a Trek fan, but have you become a Trek fan through all of these experiences?
Well, yeah, I have. I was so, as I mentioned before, I was so overwhelmed by the people I met at this big convention. I was stunned, absolutely stunned. It moved me to write a book when I hadn't even thought about writing a book. And now I've written a film script that goes along with the rebuilding of the Enterprise that kind of mirrors that. And so, yeah, but oddly enough, none of us who worked on the movie were Trek fans. We're people. Well, I just got into the film business, but I mean, all the people I worked with were in the film business, and it was a movie that came along, that they happened to work on, and so you work on it, and then that one gets done and dusted, and you go on to the next one. And like I say, I mean, even Paramount, nobody had any idea. I mean, if somebody would have said that, oh, they're going to be 12 more movies made by 2013 or whatever, they'd have thought we were all nuts. Oh, and one other thing I just wanted to mention: even at the basic level, the ebook level of $15, not only do you get your name on the sculpture, becoming a prime mover, but you also get access to 5 hours of interviews, exclusive. They're not on YouTube, and access to 80% of the website, which is locked. And I send the unlock code, and so there are lots of pictures and extra information and everything on that.
Oh, it's phenomenal. That sounds really great. Well, Paul Olsen, thank you so much for coming on the Tricorder Transmissions and sharing all this information with us and talking through your 1701 rebuild project. We're really excited to contribute ourselves and see how this project progresses over the next months and years.
Listen, you guys, Jeff and Craig, thank you very, very much. I appreciate the opportunity, and live long and prosper.
Thank you.